I stand before you with a tightening in my chest, heart hammering in my ribs, because what I'm about to tell you is not fiction, not folklore, not campfire tales told to scare. You are about to hear three true horror stories that happened on the last day of school, not long ago, in places much like the one you know, and I beg you to listen with every sense sharpened, for nothing is more chilling than reality unadorned by fiction. First, imagine the final bell has rung, and the buzz of excitement surges through the corridors. Lockers slamming, students trading yearbooks, the air thick with relief and the sweet promise of summer freedom, but beneath the surface lurked dread no one saw coming. In a school just outside a mid-sized city, 12-year-old Mia, brilliant, shy, someone who carried her books like shields, unbeknownst to every teacher and friend, had been drowning under a tide of bullying so relentless and invisible that even the adults dismissed it as kids being kids. But on that final day, as the years ended and the hallways burst with laughter, she carried in her backpack the weight not just of pencils and notebooks, but of whispered taunts and the ache of isolation. She slipped away from the lockstep wave of last-day joy, found a quiet set of lockers, stood there for a long moment, the sunlight catching dust motes, the world glittering oblivious. And then, with a trembling hand, she took a small photograph, one she'd secreted away, a picture of the one place where she felt safe, where she thought she might be able to pretend things had changed. She slipped it into her pocket and walked to the courtyard, where the others were playing tag, tagging each other on a playground that suddenly felt like a minefield. She bowed her head, swallowed hard, and in that moment of release, she chose to vanish, not in the way you might fear, but into thin air. She simply was gone. Hours later, frantic parents and administrators searched rooms, stairwells, the parking lot, the local convenience stores. And when they found her, she sat on the curb outside, knees pulled tight, face buried in her arms, sobbing in a voice so broken they barely recognized their little Mia in the wretched sounds of panic and relief and despair. She hadn't run away. She hadn't set out on some grand escape. She had collapsed under the pressure of expectations, the crush of her own invisible tears. And in those hours of terror, when hope and fear tangled, every adult realized that she had been crying out for rescue with no one listening, and that horror that happened on the last day of school could be as silent and stealthy as a spider's thread. And as the dust of relief cleared, the horror washed over them. To have let a child fall through unnoticed on the day you trust most, a day called freedom, and to find her there, crumpled, shreds of courage torn away, that was a horror none will ever forget. And still the air trembles, for the second story is equally harrowing and gruesomely real. This took place in a rural high school, where the seniors waded through farewell speeches and senior skits, where the hallways glowed with yearbook signings and promises to keep in touch. But in the parking lot, behind a rusting chain-link fence, there waited a machine, a beat-up old forklift, stored after maintenance unseen. The seniors, rowdy with the reckless delight that comes from being almost done with everything, decided on a ridiculous dare, to ride the forklift out to where the bus loading zone was, revving it up like some forbidden thrill. They shoved jokes and challenges at each other, laughter like static in the dusk. One of them, a lanky boy named Jordan with mischievous eyes and a grin that always cracked too wide, climbed atop the driver's seat. It yawed dangerously, metal groaning. And then something slipped, an unseen lever or a loose cable, and the forklift lurched forward, grinding against pavement. Jordan tried to jump, but the world tipped and twisted, and with a sickening slice of metal, a blade swung up, crushing his leg in a flash of agony too sudden to absorb. Screams shattered the mechanical lull. The forklift toppled, the air rending with Jordan's scream, red spraying like a nightmare bloom across the cracked asphalt. Students hollered. Adults raced. The principal's face went from shock to imploring rage as medtechs tackled first aid. The pungent tang of blood mixed with the burning scent of burning rubber and terror. Jordan's scream echoed for minutes that felt like lifetimes, his torment reverberating in every chest. And when the ambulance finally took him, we thought the worst had passed, but the real horror was the eyes of his friends, faces pale, tears streaming, guilt anchoring them to that spot forever. Nothing they do or say could unhowl that moment. And years later, when anyone mentions the last day of school at that high school, they feel the phantom throb of that scream in their bones, as if the asphalt itself remembers Jordan's agony. Horror, because a simple dare, a momentary lapse in judgment on the one day you should be happiest, turned into a scene so harrowing that all you can hear afterward is the silence and the blood-curdling echo of promise turned pain. And now, imagine graduation night, or rather, as it fades into memory, the last day of final exams at a university in a quiet city where lofty dreams meet real-world dread. Among the graduating class was Amir, a brilliant student from a small town, driven by hope and the fierce pride of being the first in his family to go this far. He'd spent year upon year mapping his future, tethered to the belief that education was both his anchor and his wings. On the final day, he sat an exam in an ornate hall with tall windows flooding the room with light that caught the chalk dust in the air like fairy dust, mocking the tension and the courage he wore like armor. But in that silent, sacred space, something in Amir cracked. Maybe it was the weight of 1,000 hopes he carried, or something darker, a loneliness deeper than any campus crowd could reach. When the proctor said, "Time's up," Amir didn't exhale. He stayed seated, head in his hands, breathing too fast. Then something deep inside him shattered, and in that heartbreak-cracked moment, he grabbed the nameplate on his desk, crumpled it into his palm, something primitive, something raw. And then he pressed a small recorder, a voice-activated recorder he'd brought, against his heart and pressed play, not for answers to the exam, but for the voice of his mother, in a recording he'd made months before, telling him she was proud and to never give up. That voice, the last echo of home, played faintly. Amir's body started shaking, tears breaking through the veneer of calm accomplishment his classmates wore. The sound of his mother saying, "I love you, my son," filled that hall for seconds that seemed to stretch like eternity. The proctor rushed toward him, stunned. Classmates' heads turned, some smiling, not understanding, others frowning, whispering. And then Amir stood, tears streaming, face turned upward, mouth opening in a raw, uncompromising howl, not of victory, but of grief. He collapsed to his knees, voice cracked, sobs tearing out of him. The professor tried to comfort him. The echo of that voice, the recorded voice of love, became the darkest terror, not because of evil or murder, but because of the ghost of it, the searing absence in the present. Because that wasn't the last day of school, it was the last moment before everything changed or everything ended, depending on how you saw it. In the ambulance afterward, when questions and diagnoses blurred and the campus flooded with shock, students whispered he passed out, he had a panic attack, but those who paused to imagine understood in their bones. Horror isn't only what we see. Horror is what we hear when someone's cry for love echoes back to them empty, when the one person you need most can't be there. And the last place you expect to fall apart becomes the only place you can, at the very moment you're supposed to be. Stepping into your greatest triumph. 3 stories, each a different flavor of horror, and yet all bound by the same thread. The last day of school, supposed to be a door to freedom, to joy, to bright tomorrows, becomes the setting for collapse. The silence and the vanishing of Mia, the twisted metal and blood of Jordan, the voice of a mother and the unraveling of Amir. How close we walk to the edge when the world says celebrate, when the bells ring, when we think everything's okay. And what each of those last days shows is that horror doesn't need monsters, doesn't need shadows or screams in the night. It can be a look in someone's eyes, a scream that comes too late, an echo that plays back at you when everything falls apart. So I ask you, listen, really listen, to those around you as you walk out those doors into whatever comes next. Look for the shy girl who hasn't smiled, for the boy leaning on a machine he doesn't understand, for the quiet one clutching a recording like a lifeline. Don't wait for visible wounds or broken bones. Because those last days, where we think we've reached freedom, are also the ones where hopes are highest, and the cracks in the brightest moments are the most dangerous. Please, be the presence that sees, the hand that reaches, not after the scream, but before it. even on the last day of school when we think everything is bright.